So the theme for today is something we actually don't hear mentioned all that much, and that is humility. The words humble or humility appear in the Bible around 80 times, and compare that to the word poor or all of the terms that describe service to the poor. There are about 2,000 verses in the Bible. So what is humility? And why is it that Jesus thinks it's so important? Well, in one sense, humility, of course, is the willingness to acknowledge our own limitations. Humility tells us that it actually is a benefit to own our weaknesses. We actually take a step forward when we're able to say, I'm not as patient as I need to be with my family. I'm not as creative as you are. I find it difficult to say I'm sorry, and I hold prejudices among certain people, and I'm just not a good listener. Through all these honest acknowledgments of our limitations, we can move towards the truth without devaluing ourselves. And that is so because honest humility allows us to acknowledge our weaknesses and at the same time realize that we remain people of goodness and dignity. We might not be perfect, but we have value. We might not be able to do everything, but we have something to contribute. Humility allows us to claim the truth about ourselves. But we should say that humility does not only influence this understanding of ourselves, it also changes our view of others. For humility allows us to see the goodness of others and to treat them with reverence. Think about it. Why is it that when we experience a death in our family, those small actions of kindness and thoughtfulness of others, why do they so deeply move us? It is because death makes us humble. It forces us to face our own mortality and our need. And in that humility, we can more clearly see the goodness of others as they minister to us in our grief. Or why is it that the alcoholics or those involved in 12-step programs can so clearly appreciate the value of life and create such tight bonds with others in the recovery community? It is because their addiction makes them humble, and they realize that every day they are clean is a gift. Why is it that people who struggle with cancer or any other serious illness are often so willing to extend themselves to others who are struggling with the same sickness? It's because the cancer makes them humble, and they can more clearly see the reverence of their own life and the value and the goodness of every other person. Those people who are perhaps overly proud, who feel that they can do it all on their own, I think are not able to see as clearly the reverence that they should have for others. They tend to relate to others in terms of what the other can provide for them. And that is why I think Jesus gives the strong teaching in today's gospel. that our association with others should not flow from our use of them, but from their value as people. Perhaps no one in my lifetime embodied this more compellingly than St. Teresa of Calcutta. She drew thousands to her order, and she ministered in the streets and the gutters, and she gave hope to lepers and to orphans and to widows and to beggars. The very ones Christ tells us to invite into our lives became a part of Mother Teresa's life. She gave dignity to the undignified and love to the unloved. Each one of them is Jesus in disguise. She memorably shared with us. In another sense, humility makes us acknowledge that we are dependent upon God for our very existence. The great medieval saint and doctor of the Church, Catherine of Siena, has a famous line in this regard. She said this: God is he who is. I am she who is not. In other words, she owes her very existence to God's goodwill. Humility is the virtue which keeps us honest about ourselves, who we are and who God is. I hope you notice that Jesus' teaching today is a parable. And a parable is meant to reveal something about our relationship to God and to God's kingdom. And usually the meaning of a parable rests on one key insight. And here's the insight I would suggest for today's parable. It is all about the host. The host is the main character in the parable. And we ought to understand that the host in this case is God. And here's the good news of the parable. God, our host, loves us, even with all of our weaknesses. He has invited you and me to the wedding banquet of his love. Therefore, in the end, the place in which we find ourselves is so less important than the fact that we are at the table. The parable asks us to trust the host, to accept where we have been placed, always remembering for us that God's love is secure. Whether we find ourselves seated high or low, God has invited us to the wedding banquet. And I assure you, our host will see that we have enough to eat. I can think of no greater example of humility than the Eucharist we are about to receive. When God becomes bread, and bread becomes God. When the exalted is humbled, and the humble exalted. And we, who are about to share that mystery, in receiving it, are also exalted and humbled. Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, we say. But he does. And we are transformed. So, as we prepare to receive Christ in the appearance of bread, we pray in humility to welcome him and, like St. Teresa, to answer in some small way his invitation to finish what he has begun. To be his hands, to be his voice, to be his light, to give love to the unloved, and hope to the hopeless.